Hello everyone, today we will be writing a login system that will allow you to create a user, log in a user, and kind of everything surrounding that. So let's just get right into it. So let's start with a magic line of code here. This is what Python looks for when writing or when creating a Python program. And I'm going to create a function called main. And I'm just trying to do this on the fly here, so it's probably not going to be the best design, but it'll work. And I'm just going to want to call a controller. I like to have controllers and things like this. Main is just supposed to be super clean code, and my controller is going to actually handle all of the nitty-gritty stuff, like calling other functions and things like that. So let's have a startup shell that gets called, and literally the function of a startup shell is literally just to print some options for a user. So I'm going to print say create user. If I can type create user, and then on another line we also want to type in login. And I think that should be what the startup shell does, right? It just prints out a login and a create user option. From here, let's have a user input function that just processes user input. So let's do user input. And in this function, we'll just take in whatever user input we need to do. So in this case, we have so in this case, we want to see if they're entering a valid user input of create a user or logging in a user. So here we will have, let's call it user choice. And this is going to equal a integer input of please enter, please select a choice, please, yeah. Okay, so this user input function will take the user input and kind of process the startup user input. So actually I want to just call it startup user input. Start user input, okay? So it's going to take in a choice, and we're going to say if the user choice, let's try it here, try, and we're going to put an accept as e, print e. So if they don't enter an integer, it will continue to prompt. And I'm going to say if user choice is equal to 1, none, we'll just return the user choice. How about that? Let's return user choice. Okay. Yeah, so we'll call this integer user input. So anytime we need to get integer user input, we're going to call integer user input, okay? So now, not return user choice, we should, yeah, user choice, that's not a function. Okay, Let's just leave it for now. Figure out all of this junk. So if we do this, we need to call up integer user input, and we're going to call this startup choice. Start choice. Is going to be to please select a choice. I will select 1, and let's just print the start choice here. You'll see it'll just spit back 1 to me, right? So here we're going to say if start choice is equal to 1, then we want to create a user. So I want to create a user. I'm just going to put a and then else elif start choice is equal to a 2, then we want to log in a user. And then finally, else we want to print, that choice was not valid. Please try again. So I already see this kind of breaking if I put in anything but an integer. So we can check to see if it's an integer in a bit here. But let's kind of write some logic out for creating a user and logging in a user. And let's continue to prompt while valid choice is not true. We want to continue prompting for the start choice, right? So let's make valid choice equals to false. At this point, we would want to make valid choice true here at the very end, because 1 and 2 are valid choices. So that will help us break out of this loop. All right, so let's give this a shot. Actually, before we give this a shot, let's print valid choice, just to kind of get a little bit of feedback here. All right, so let's enter choice 1. That's a valid choice. Run it again. 2, also a valid choice. Run it again. 3, that choice is not valid. Please try again. Okay, so we have this working. And again, I did call this out earlier. Is if I did hello, it's gonna break because it can't convert that to a integer. But for right now, let's just leave it at that. I guess an easy fix would be just to take the integer out, but I think that might create some evaluation issues, right? Because now it's looking at this as a literal. We could typecast it, but we'd get an issue down here. Yeah, I guess we should just do that. That might just make it easier. So while valid choice equals start choice of the integer variable. So we're gonna cast. We're gonna cast the start choice as a integer. So that way, even if you input hello, it's not gonna equal 2. So we're gonna go in here, and I think we've just solved that issue. So if I type in hello, Oh yeah, see it is breaking because it's trying to do it here. So okay, whatever. We'll just leave that at the source then. Let's leave that code clean. Okay. So far we have that's valid choice. Cool. Now let's write some create user logic. Okay, so when we're creating a user, we want to prompt the user for a username and a password, and kind of store those, right? So we'll say username is equal to input, and this can literally be anything of please enter a username, right? And then password is going to be input please enter a password, and we'll do double check password. And this is also going to be pretty much the same thing, but we're going to say please re-enter the password. And here we're only going to return the username and password if these two check out, right? So if the password is equal to the double check password, then we want to return the username and password. If not, let's say the passwords don't match. Print please try again. Okay. And we want to keep pushing for a password until they've entered a successful password. So again, we'll kind of do the whole valid choice thing here. Valid choice equals to false, or we'll say valid password equals to false. And we want to keep prompting. So while valid password is not true, we want to keep asking for a password and for them to double check their password. And if they do that correctly, let's set valid password to true. Okay. If not, we'll just say they don't match, and we'll try again. So here I want to create a user. It's just going to say valid choice because we have not updated the controller. So in the create user option, we're going to get rid of this print statement, and we're actually just going to call the function create user. Okay. So that's instantly going to take you to the username. So we'll just say test, test. And again, we'll say test. Cool. So here, let's just do a little bit of aesthetics. So I want to print this. So create user. That was 4, right? And you said no, that's 5. Yeah, 5. Okay, so that's going to be the create user kind of screen, I guess, right here. And then at the top, if you do this and we do end up returning it, we'll just say print user was successfully created. Right? User was successfully created. So if we run this, I want to create a user, it takes me to this created user screen. Please enter username, we'll say test, and I'll just write test2 to make sure they don't match. Password don't match, please try again. And yeah, okay, so then we'll just say test, user was successfully created, and we've sent back the user and the password. So that means that the create user is going to have some type of return, right? So let's create a username and a password here, and set that equal to the create user. Now, once we have a username and password, we want to push that into a database. In this case, we're just going to have a file. So we'll just call this establish connection con to DB. We could have some database logic here, but right now we're just going to have it be established. It's just going to open a file. So we'll just call this file, we'll put in this variable called database, and we're going to set this to open a file called database.csv. This needs to be in quotes. And we want to append to it because we're not going to rewrite the file every time. We just want to append to the file every time. Yeah, okay. So we established a connection to the database, so that's literally just going to open a file to append to. I think that's good. So in the controller, before the startup shell even happens, let's establish a connection to the database. And let's return the database up here, that database variable, which is essentially just a file. And we'll just call this part to database here. Database is equal to establish connection to database. Okay. I'm going to put this right here. Okay, so essentially we're establishing a connection to database, setting up and storing it in the database. We're going to have a startup shell, and the startup shell is just going to kind of make sure that the choice on the startup is accurate and valid. If so, then we're going to, in the case of a 1, we're going to create a user. In the case of a 2, we're going to log in. And if not, we're just going to say try again. Okay. So in the create user function, everything is good. We also need to push that data to a database, right? So I'll say def push credentials, I guess, to DB. And this is going to take in the database that it's passing into. It's going to take a username, and it's going to take a password, push credentials to DB, and basically all we're going to do is we're going to say, let's create a line, I guess. So the line would be username plus a comma plus a password, and then we'll just write the line. So database.writeLine, and this is, now we're just working with a CSV file, but it'll work. I think it's just write line, and we'll write that line. And then here we will push credentials to DB. We want to use that database variable we had at the top. We want to use this username that we get from the create user function, and also the password. So if I say create a user and I enter the username as data engineering made easy, enter a password as test password, and then again test pass. No attribute right line. I think right lines. There we go. All right. So again, let's select a choice. Data engineering made easy. Password is going to be test pass, and okay. User was successfully created, and if we look at our database CSV, we have DEME and test pass. Okay, now we're going to talk about the login portion of this. So in the start choice, we're going to have a logins kind of function. So def login user. So login, again, we're just going to ask for a username and a password. So here we would just say username is going to equal to input of username, right? And password is going to equal to some input that they create of a password. Awesome. All right. Now we want to check the database.csv file. So what we'll do is we'll say with database with open database with the database.csv as, let's call it db, for line in db print line. So this will just give us a gist of if it's actually even understanding or if it's actually even processing the data. So in this part, let's just make this a little easier to read. So we're going to say create user logic. This is going to be login user logic. And then let's just say invalid input. All right. Awesome. So here, valid choice, let's take that out and let's just say log me in, right? And login, we'll just call this function up here. Well, you'll have to enter a username and password, and in this case, we're just gonna print the lines, right? So please select a choice. Let's log in. Username doesn't really matter, and it's just printing the whole file out, which is DME test pass. Okay. So now in here, this is actually probably the worst way to do it, is iterating through the file, but just for the sake of this video, let's just do it like this. So if, so let's do line.split. Actually, first thing we probably should be doing up here, I just realized, is we should add a new character line. If not, it'll just concatenate the string as it goes. Okay, so line.split by the comma, and we'll say the DB user is equal to the first entry of that. The DB password is equal to line.split by the comma of the first, right? And we'll say if the username that you've provided is equal to the DB user, right? and the password that you provided is equal to the DB password. And I should probably make that an uppercase just for consistency. Then we will say welcome. We'll just say print. Welcome. And we'll say username. If not, if we basically go through the whole file and we don't find you, then we'll basically say print invalid credentials. Try again. Right, and we're going to put this in a while loop again. So so we're going to say while login successful is not equal to true, we'll just call login every time. So this, yeah, okay. So here, and let's return true, and then if not, we'll return false. Okay. In here, when we log in, we're going to get a value, right? A true or false value. So we'll just call this login success is equal to login. And we're going to say if login success is equal to true, let's just put this in a while loop. So while login success is not equal to true, we're going to keep calling in login. So we're going to call in login the first time. It's going to set this to false. We're going to say login success is equal to login again. Okay, so I want to log in. I'll say test invalid credentials, try again, test again, invalid credentials. I think my credentials were DEME, and then test invalid credentials. What were they? They're test pass. Okay, so DEME test pass, welcome DEME, right? All right, everyone, let's go ahead and test this program. I've just added a little bit of aesthetics in how it interacts with you, which you'll see in a bit, and just a tad bit of recursion so that unless you log in or exit, it's just going to keep calling this home page, I guess, so you can keep creating users or then log in after you created a user. So let's go ahead and test this out. Let's start with creating a user. Let's have the username be DEME and the password be password. And again, re-entering the password as password. So it says user was successfully created. Again, and we have the same three options. Let's create another user, but this time let's write an incorrect password. So let's write test, and then when we're checking, let's write test1. So this is the passwords don't match, please try again. So we can write test and test again. And as you can see, it says the user was successfully created. Let's try to log in using that same test login. So in the login, we'll type in DME, but this time let's type in a wrong password. So test1, and it says invalid credentials, Try again. Brings me back to the login screen. So let me try DEME and then just test. And it says, welcome DEME, because we've inserted the correct credentials. Awesome. So that was it for Data Engineering Made Easy today. We can add more functionality to this in later videos in terms of hashing the functions and the hashing the username and the password before it gets to the database itself, kind of how we discussed in the database security concepts video. And we can also kind of include things like a strong password checker to make sure that the password you choose is actually a strong password and not something like password. Awesome. So we will do that in future videos, but thank you for watching.